All right, let's get started. So hopefully you're in the right location. This is the ArcGIS API for JavaScript What's New section. My name's Lloyd Heberly, and I'm a product engineer on the JavaScript team. I mostly work on the front-end SDK site, so the JavaScript site that's part of the developer's website. So we always appreciate your feedback on that. And then I also work on a few of the other parts of the API. And with me is Julie.
I'm a product manager for JavaScript API.
And Julie's going to start us off today and talk to us about some visualization stuff.
Okay. So the What's New session we've been doing every year, and I've gotten feedback over time that, okay, don't cover everything you guys have done in the last year. Just focus on things that are more recent, do it well, and make sure we've kind of explained it without going too fast. So what we've done is basically kind of grouped, big development themes together of the more recent things we've been working on, and we'll kind of go through into those different areas. So for visualization, I like to start with vector tile layers because, it's kind of the way we traditionally think about working with vector tile or vector data in a tile form. Is the vector tile base maps. And I remember talking to users from some time back saying that, oh my gosh, I used to spend all my time making a base map. Most of your time was doing that. So now basically you can just use one of the Esri base maps. If you don't like it, you can style it however you'd like. It shows up really crisp and clear. And you can really tell the difference now if you compare vector tiles to a raster tile. Pat did a really great demo of the vector tile style editor. Have you guys seen that before? It's not brand new, but it's not as discoverable as we're going to make it. There'll be more deeper integration with online going forward. So you'll be able to easily find it and style your layers as you'd like, whatever your taste is for the base maps. Recently in version 4.10, which was back in December, we updated it to basically, you can update the layout and the style of vector tile layers without having to reload the map. So it's kind of a pretty cool effect to be able to update it right in code and see that change happen dynamically without reloading anything. So kind of switching gears into what we refer to as feature tiles. This is kind of what's behind the scenes working and making it so that you can work with actual features, not just like a pre-cooked tile, but working with the actual real source data in a very performant way. And traditionally, we always talk about WebGL. So WebGL is a really fast way to render your data because it's using your hardware, but it's not just about WebGL. So basically, you need to be able to obtain that data in a really fast way. Especially if you're working with a lot of data. And the way we do that is basically using the PBF format, which is a binary format. We also, in terms of querying, and this is really where the tile comes in, if you've thought about how tiles work, basically you're working with very regular requests for an extent. If you zoom to a particular area, it's not going to send some custom extent for that area. It's actually going to be regular tile boundaries. And that's what enables caching. So that if Lloyd goes to that same area, he's not going to request some different extent. It's going to be the regular, this regular extent for the different tile boundaries. So what we're doing is basically caching all of these feature tiles, not just in the browser. That's kind of the first place we would check to see if you already have visited that map area. We also cache it on our CDN, which is really edge caching. So if you're somewhere worldwide, you don't have to come all the way to America to get those tiles. It's actually cached globally. If it's not available on the edge cache, then it actually goes to online and sees if there's a cache that's already been generated. Because the last thing that we want to do is actually have to go to the database and then pull it out, because that's the slowest way to obtain the data. Now you might think, well, this is dynamic data. So how does that work if your data is updated? You want to make sure you're getting the latest data. So it actually does have a way of going back and making sure, is this data changed? If it hasn't, then it just sends you the tile. So I like showing this picture because it kind of gives you a visual of how the requests are made. We used to talk about the limit. So ArcGIS server was it a 2,000 feature limit that you could do per query? There's always some sort of limit, whether it's 2,000, and you can actually configure that in ArcGIS Online as well. But basically, so that you don't, even in very dense areas, it splits up kind of recursively those requests, so that really dense areas has more requests in a smaller extent, and then you get in the more spread out areas, you can make less requests. And so that's kind of how the request works within the API. So kind of applying that, you can see, and I've kind of blown it up because it's really small. This is just looking at the traffic, looking at the format of the query being PBF. It's using the HTTP 2 protocol. Also, on the right-hand side, that's where it's saying, okay, you already visited that part of the map before. You don't have to go back to the database. Hit from CloudFront just means it pulled it from the CDN. Refresh hit from the CloudFront means like, oh, that tile's a little bit older. Let's make sure it hasn't been updated, and then returns it if it isn't dirty. So it's actually a pretty cool mechanism, kind of building off something that's been around for a long time. The whole process of using a cache, the purpose of a cache, but now we're applying it to very dynamic data, being able to visualize things on the client, having the actual attributes and source, everything there so you can work with it and do lots of cool things. So some of those cool things include the data-driven styling. Jeremy showed some really great demos of answering very basic questions. Where is something? Styling it just to know where it is, versus what is it, when did it happen, so looking based on time and how much of it. So we've really been working hard on coming out with different styles to really let you tell the story behind your data and do some great things dynamically or ahead of time, taking advantage of all these performance gains. So now that you have this data on the client, it wouldn't really help if all you could do is just show it. And then you had to go to the server to be able to perform any sort of analytics, because then you're actually sending things back and forth. So kind of another area of focus for the team has been really building a lot of that, smarts directly into the API, so you don't have to go to the server to perform something. So basically querying, filtering, geometric operations. We used to use the geometry service, if you guys remember that, to perform any sort of geometry operations. Now, there's very, very few cases where you actually have to do that. Almost everything can be done on the client using the client-side geometry engine, including projection. And performing statistical calculations as well. And something that's new that's coming in 4.11, again, and that's in 3 weeks from now, is filtering. This is client-side filtering. And we talk about filtering in a couple different ways. There's the filtering where you just don't want to show everything on the screen. You just want to show some. It's kind of like a definition expression. Then there's the filtering. It's like, well, I want to emphasize some features, but I still want to show everything for context. And that's what's being displayed here. So we're going to show you a couple different demos illustrating those concepts. This is actually using a template that's coming out. Our configurable web templates are all going to start taking advantage of a lot of these new features that we have, some of this client-side filtering in this case. So basically, it's just going through and saying, okay, I want to filter and just show these particular regions using a custom view on top of the legend. And I can just drill in and see the different areas I'm interested in. That's a very basic example. It also has, by the way, the new screenshot capability. So I think it's version 4.9, we added the ability to take a screenshot in 3D, which is kind of a nice thing to do because you don't have to go to a server and try to create something. Basically, you just take an immediate screenshot in 3D, and then bam, you have something with the dimensions you ask for, the different format you request, and it's a pretty quick thing you can do. The 2D version of screenshots coming in 4.11. So that's what this thing is here. So I say, okay, I want a screenshot, set the map area that I'm interested in, and then it creates that screenshot I can download. So looking at a couple examples of how this is working, this is a very basic example just showing Hurricane Harvey. And what it's doing is as the slider moves, it's picking up that value of the rainfall in inches. And then in the data, basically going back and doing a where expression on the attribute and saying, okay, that's the part of the hurricane I want to display. So to do that, all it's doing is setting that where expression. That's the filter being applied, and then that's what they do on the view. So the important point here is this isn't actually going back to the database. It's just using what's displayed, what's actually already on the client, and filtering it within the view. You can do the same thing from a spatial perspective. So in this case, I can select the layer that I'm interested in. So I have a point layer or a lines layer. And then I can select it by geometry. So maybe I just want to filter it by a polygon and find those features that fall within my polygon or a point. Something cool, though, is you can also do buffer distance. So you can see as I move, it's actually calculating a geodesic buffer distance from that point. And whether it's a polygon or lines, it does the same thing. So it's pretty fast because you're not actually having to do any calculation server side. So here, if you look at the code, I'm just setting the geometry. You can do different spatial relationships. So it can be intersects, it can be contains. You have a wide variety of types of geometry you can use for that effect, that filtering. This is another example that they showed in plenary, similar to the previous example. Basically, rather than hiding it, so if you remember in this case, this is where it actually disappeared if I didn't want to display it. But in this case, I just want to emphasize the features that I'm interested in, and then show the features are still there, but I'm not interested in, they're just kind of de-emphasized in gray. So the way that's handled is actually all done on the feature layer view. And there's a couple properties, effect and filter. The effect is basically just saying, like, I want to apply effect. I want all the features to be there, but I want to decide how I'm visualizing the stuff that's within my filter and stuff that I'm visualizing outside my filter. And you can actually define what that should look like. The other one is the filter, and that's actually really removing them from the view and just showing a subset of the features you're interested in. So that's filtering. Another visualization technique that's new with 4.11 is dot density. And we had dot density in 3x for some time. So this is brand new for 4x. I'm not sure if people have used dot density before. Have people used dot density or know why it's interesting? I actually had to kind of study it to really understand why it's interesting. I think one really powerful use for it is basically you're showing, how much of something, a count of something within a polygon. And it's kind of straightforward to think about, okay, if I have one attribute, you typically can just color a polygon by the count to show that thematic value within a polygon. But what if you want to show multiple attributes within a polygon? How would you kind of illustrate that? So it's kind of a great way to show, in this case, it's just showing race, but showing the emphasis of the distribution of a count within a polygon. And then you can go and drill in and kind of see where some of those, where that density occurs within these polygons. This is the other example shown in plenary. This is looking at Houston housing. If you notice, sorry, before I go to this one, if you notice here, I've defined that one dot equals 800 people. In this case, it's one dot equals one house. So you can actually define how much each dot represents within your data just to figure out how much you actually want to display, how much data you're working with. So to look and see how you do that in code, basically it's just this property saying that it's just a render, the dot density render, and then you're setting the reference dot value to say that one dot equals 100 people. So it's pretty easy to set that up how you want to display. And then here I'm just pulling out the attributes I want to visualize and what they should represent. So new in 4.11 is the GeoJSON layer. You've been able to work with GeoJSON before 4.11. You can actually do it now just with your own code. The GeoJSON layer just makes it easier to basically just set it up the way you'd work with any other layer. It's an out-of-box layer type. In this case, I'm just showing these earthquakes, similar that we were doing in plenary. To set that up, I'm setting up a pop-up, so I basically can click on any one of these points and then say exactly what information I want to show in the pop-up. And then this just looks like any of the other layers. If you've worked with feature layers before, it's similar. I'm just setting up, how do I want to display it? In this case, I'm sizing them based on the magnitude of the earthquake. So it really looks like just any other layer. But it's, now that it's actually just like any other layer, it's just as easy to do it in 3D as well. I think it was 4.9, it was either 4.9 or 4.10. We added the ability to set a transparency. So, on the base map. So basically, if you want to look underneath, you can see, in this case, it's actually using a visual variable to show depth of these earthquakes as well, to be able to visualize it underground. So it's kind of cool that you can now work with GeoJSON and really just treat it like any other layer type. And an example of that, the GeoJSON spec only supports really WGS84. All of your data of GeoJSON is just going to come in as WGS84. So if you're using some other base map with a different projection, it's just going to work. It just works because we have a projection engine that's tied into the API. We bring in that layer, and then it's just going to project on the fly right on the client. So it's a pretty powerful capability. So I think, okay, just the dot density, and then just a review of the GeoJSON layer. And again, this one's coming in 4.11. Labeling is something that we've been working on, kind of adding functionality over time. Something that I like to point out about labeling is you can actually have multiple. The way you style labels is using something called the label class. And so you can actually put multiple labels with different styling on the same feature. So what we're looking at is wind readings. And I can decide, how do I want to display the wind speed, the temperature, and I'm not sure what that other value is, but basically style the labels differently on the same feature and put multiple things on there. You can also do multiple line. In 4.10, we added the ability to label lines. So at this point, you can label points, lines, and polygons. So this was one of the bigger things we had left for supporting the web map spec. We're kind of making our way in parity to reach full parity with 3x. And this is one of the last things that we had to have the parity with web map support. Finally, for the people that are fairly advanced developers, we've had the ability to create custom layer views. So that's, for example, you could extend our elevation layer and exaggerate mountains, for example, if you want to do that. Or you could even create your own layer that's bringing in some sort of data type that we don't have out of the box. That's actually different from creating this WebGL layer view. This is actually tapping into the WebGL rendering in the API. We added that ability for 3D to create your own custom WebGL layer view in 3D. I think that was in 4.10. And now we can also do it in 4.11 in 2D as well. And if you guys remember from the plenary, the demo that they showed with the campfires and the smoke and the wind on the grass, that's the WebGL layer view. Does anyone think they might do that? All right, we got this is fairly advanced stuff, but you can actually produce some pretty incredible visualizations, really realistic stuff. Okay, back to Lloyd, and we're going to talk a little bit more about 3D.
Thanks, Julie. So Raluca demonstrated this morning, and this is a sort of a more detailed walkthrough. The scene starts out, we filter it using a mask, and then this goes through a little bit more detail about what you can actually do in this participatory planning. So we're demonstrating the new drawing API in 3D and how you can sketch these different features and buildings by adding and masking different information and placing the trees as they were done before, and then also the ability to add in those GLTF models in order to bring in your own symbology that you may have with that. So that we have this app at the island, so if you want to come by, you can play around with it. But there are a lot of clicks and interactivity in that, so it's a lot that went on in that demonstration there in that video. This was something similar that was shown this morning when Raluca brought in that custom feature and was able to resize it and move it around, and all of that is just built in, and you don't have to write any of that code to be able to sketch and move those things around. And that is part of that open standard that Raluca was talking about with Kronos. We also have, in a previous release, adding the building scene layer type. So this was some of the stuff they were talking about in the plenary with the relationship that we have with AutoCAD, with Revit and the BIM data, and being able to bring that in and visualize that. And you can actually interact with the features and see the pop-ups and turn layers on and off and all of that nice functionality. And the slice tool is also another new feature that was added, a new widget that they demoed in the plenary this morning, where you can control things that you want to hide or show and delve into the other layers that would normally be difficult to see. We've also made an effort to bring better visualization and richness to the high density, the high DPI screens. And so you can see the difference here between how much visualization that makes a difference for whenever seeing the crispness of these edges. Some of the other 3D sessions that you might be interested in attending that will kind of give you an idea, if you've never worked with this before, how you can take your 2D data, get that ready for 3D, publish those services that you'll need, and then use that in either the scene viewer or in the API. There's also another topic I wanted to point out and show you. There's a guide topic that's visualizing points with 3D symbols, and it goes through a lot of the info that you would need to understand in the API in order to produce a visualization like this. And like some of the other things that we were looking at in 3D, like the masking. This is a new sample at 411 that allows you to draw a polygon and mask out and hide buildings. And then the other one was the slice widget that we talked about. So the search in the sample code is quite helpful. You can search for 3D or keywords. There's tags at the bottom of the samples that if you ever can't find a sample, these tags down here, you can type those tags into that search box and it'll find the different samples based upon that. So widgets are, you can just kind of think of them as pre-canned chunks of functionality where there's certain use cases that people want to explore or visualize or edit or measure, zoom to a certain location of like a bookmark. And we provide all of that information readily available to you as this pre-canned functionality. And then we also give you access to the SAS that generates the CSS for how these things look, as well as the view model and the source for that business logic for any of these widgets. So if you decide that you want to customize a certain widget that we already have to meet your own needs or extend it, all of that information is out there, and I'll show that to you in a minute. But we try and and give you most of the functionality that you're going to need so you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Keep going.
And this is just a screenshot of some of those different widgets that that are in the table of contents in the SDK, and then the feature form widget and base map gallery. And we also have a new legend widget that has a portrait and landscape mode that works well for giving you access to a bunch of information if you're on a wider screen, or if you're on a tablet or a phone. It narrows down and you get the buttons across the bottom where you can toggle through the different pieces of the legend. One of the other things that is new is the ability to use Arcade and have access to the feature in the pop-up, so you can actually do a search distance from when you clicked on the feature. It actually searches out, and in this case, from the hotel, we're finding the nearest restaurant and then putting that information into the pop-up window there. There's something else I was going to show, and I don't remember what it was. One of the other new features that was demonstrated this morning by Franco, that was the visibility expression in the feature form, and being able to use Arcade in there to hide or filter that form to make it easier for folks to fill that information out. This is just from the online detailed agenda. These are some of the other sessions you might be interested in if you think you might be doing custom widget development or just modifying the UI. I know one of the other things I wanted to show. So if in the API, if you go to any of the widgets, let's say we just take the base map gallery, where here it says this see also, these links to this TSX file, that's a TypeScript file that will get compiled into JavaScript. But that's the business logic that I was telling you about. So any of the widgets, you have access to that. It's on our hosted GitHub repo, and you can dig in and see how we've built our widgets, and then you can build your own widgets. And between this information and some of the guide topics, and then the other sessions you have access to, should get you a pretty good head start on writing your own custom widgets.
Actually, that's not the business logic. This is the views. So if you basically want to slap on like a different presentation on top of the widget and use our business logic under the hood, that's what you can do. And when Lloyd was talking about the legend, that's a really good example of that. So basically taking our same, it takes a lot of work to write out all the code to, parse all your layers, find all the symbols, and create a legend. So all that work could be done for you using the business logic, which is the widget view model. And then actually,
Sorry.
And then actually create a custom widget view on top of that. So if you can customize it, you can just use our code to customize it as you'd like, or completely replace it using a different UI library, however you'd like to do it. So it's kind of a gamut of how much customization you'd like to do, all the way from just basic styling or nothing, nothing to little styling to complete replacement of the presentation of the widget. Me? Okay. So this is, I know, an important topic for a lot of you, and it's been kind of the thing that a lot of people have been waiting for to move over to 4X is sketching and editing. So I wanted to spend, a good amount of time just drilling into what's there and what you can do now and how the kind of pieces fit together. So we've come out with the sketch widget. It's an out-of-box widget that allows you to draw graphics on the graphic layer. So that means that you're just kind of doing redlining. You're not saving it back to the database anywhere. It's just kind of drawing and sketching literally on the map. You can use this out-of-box widget, or kind of like I was describing with the widget paradigm, you can just use the sketch view model and create your own experience for sketching. You can do either one. I always like to point out that, as I was describing the client-side geometry engine, in sketching and editing, we expose all the different events as doing map interaction. So if you want to tap into when the user does a particular thing and do extra validation or do some sort of custom workflow with the geometry, you can use the geometry engine to do any of that kind of thing on the client. So really, any sort of editing experience you want to do, you can actually implement that. So actually, up until 4.11, this is what we had. These are the kind of the pieces that we made available basically up until December of last year was the feature form widget. That's the one that Lloyd was talking about. So that's really for editing attribute data. Quite a bit of improvements from 3x. So basically the team has, on all the widgets, taken a fresh approach, lessons learned from what we've done from 3x and requests that we've gotten, and trying to come up with a new fresh UI that's responsive. So putting together the attribute editing via feature form. The next one is what we used to call the template picker. I think it's now the feature template widget. Same, it's basically a very similar thing. So essentially you're defining, when I add a point or add a line, what is that feature, how should that feature look like? What are the attributes? Defining that up front. So that piece was already available, that widget. And then as I had showed earlier, the sketch widget. So you could have taken these pieces and put together your own editing experience on your own with some custom code. So now with 4.11, we're introducing the editor widget, which basically pulls those things together and creates that start to finish editing experience. So what we define as editing is either creating a new feature or updating an existing feature. So let's look at a couple of examples. So this is the sketch widget. I kind of wanted to show you a little bit more about the individual widgets that are already out there. So I can basically, create a simple polygon, create a second one. I can do multiple select and delete them, or rotate them, size them. I can go in and actually edit individual vertices. I can undo and redo. So there's quite a bit you can do just playing around with sketching. So to do all of this, just using the out-of-box widget, this is literally all the code that is required. So it's pretty nice for code maintainability if you're just trying to do the basic sketching. So this is the looking at the attribute editing, so via the feature form. I'm selecting an existing feature, and some of the things that are interesting here is you can create custom groups of attributes. So some people out there, definitely a lot of developers that I've helped, sometimes you're dealing with layers that have like a gazillion attributes. And you may or may not want your end users to have to deal with all of them. Maybe you do, maybe they need to deal with all of them. But at least you could group them into kind of logical groupings for them and just kind of provide a better editing experience for them. So you have the ability to group attributes. You also have the ability to decide which attributes you're going to display and which ones you're not, require them to edit. It does work against subtypes and all of that. So if there's like a drop, it creates a drop down if there's a particular fields you want them to pick from. So I could go ahead and edit that and then update the in this case, an assessment. This is the feature template. I have a really hard time not saying template picker. This is the feature template. That's the new name for it. This is Redlands, and if you guys are thinking about visiting Redlands, don't worry, there is not this much crime there. It's actually a pretty nice little neighborhood. So if we go over here, I can just create one of these new features. How about a street light? And then this is the subtypes I was talking about, drop down, and then what is this? A manhole cover. It's up, whatever. And update it and then done. So it's just kind of basic editing. So those are all the pieces, and then actually doing the full editor widget. So this is the widget that's coming out in 4.11, and it's pulling those pieces together. One thing that I like to point out is that in terms of sketching, so I'll actually start and create a new feature. And in this case, I don't know why we use so much crime, because it feels like kind of a downer topic, but I can start sketching like a new, I don't know, this is like a Segway patrol. So this looks very similar to what I was showing with Sketch, right? What this widget is doing is actually just using the sketch view model. So this is using the business logic under the hood, and it's creating a new UI for it and integrating it into this editor widget. So after I've created the geometry, I can pick a particular field and then say add it. I can go back in and say, okay, now I want to edit that guy. I select it, and then I can do all the same sort of editing that I showed you earlier with Sketch. So a couple things I wanted to show you with the code. This is that custom group I was talking about. So when it comes to editing attributes, you can group them as you'd like. Something I forgot to mention is what the editor widget does is it detects all of the editable feature layers in the map. So automatically it will find all of them and then populate the widget and allow the user to edit them. Now, I don't know if you guys noticed in Plenary, we kind of touched over it kind of quickly. You can actually configure the feature services to allow different sort of editing, like just being able to be updated, add new features, whether you can edit it, whether you can't edit it. So there's a lot of different configuration you can do. The widget will respect all of that configuration of the service, but you can also do additional configuration on top of that. So say you've got a billion attributes part of a layer, but you only want your end users to have to edit like a couple of them. You can actually specify, okay, these are just the attributes that I want to display in the editor, only show those, and group them in this way. So that's what this code is doing. Basically, it's creating groupings of attributes, and then it goes in here and sets up the configuration for what should be editable and how. So I think it's pretty straightforward for actually using that widget, and hopefully will reduce your code when you're trying to do editing. Okay, on to tooling with Lloyd.
Okay, thanks, Julie. So show of hands, how many of you are already using Node and some kind of task stuff in your web development? Quite a few of you. Okay, that's more of you should probably be raising your hands the way things are these days with frameworks, and you're almost sort of forced into it. So what I'm going to talk about is things that are based upon Node. So if you're not familiar with Node, Node is sort of a headless JavaScript running in your shell, in your terminal window. So you see people writing command line stuff a lot of times. Watching TV, the lines are passing by real crazy, and if your wife or partner or whatever is not into IT, they're like, what the heck are you doing? Because it's just running through there crazy. But basically, running Node, using NPM, these sorts of things allow you to automate tasks, either like converting SAS to CSS, or transpiling ES6 JavaScript code to ES5 using something like Babel, or using Webpack to bundle up what you're building, or transpiling your TypeScript. And so we are sticking with or going with the way that tech is going in web development now, and we offer the ability to use Node and NPM to do custom builds of the API. So show of hands, how many of you are messing around with creating your own custom builds of the API? A few of you? Okay. I mean, it's something that's great once you've ironed out all the details and you get it working and you've optimized your app, but it is something that that takes time and is can be complicated to set up if you've never installed any of this stuff before, and you're new to Node, and you're new to running stuff in a terminal window, and you're not used to working with headless software that's just running in a terminal spitting stuff out. So this is directly from our guide topic. So we have the using NPM, and this basically uses the Dojo build system behind the scenes. So it essentially allows you to create your own custom build of the JavaScript API. So the CDN version is like our best guess of what sort of modules everyone would use in just a generic, hey, give me the API. And then anything that's not included in that is either lazy loaded or fetched at runtime through the AMD loader to pull down those modules that your app needs. So the whole purpose of doing this tooling and doing these custom builds is so that if you have a very specific or task-focused app that uses a certain set of modules, you can create one of these custom builds, and then all of that is in this single built layer file when you load the app, and then those modules aren't dynamically requested and fetched to reduce the load time. So that's sort of the big 40,000 foot overview goal of why you would be interested in doing this. We also support using Webpack, and there's a Webpack plugin for this, and you need Node, and then we have some repos out there that help you get started with this. There's also a CLI, a command line interface, that helps you create like a scaffold app that will fit well with doing these types of builds. And that's in the Esri repo. And under the Esri org on GitHub, there's this JS API resources repo that has all this stuff in it for NPM and Webpack and Bower, and it's for 3x and 4x. So you find all of that information there. We also provide some quick start or some help to use frameworks. So I'm sure if you're in the scene with using Node and keeping up with TypeScript and what's going on in web development, seems like there's a new framework every other week, and then the versioning goes crazy, and it's a lot to keep up with. So a lot of times people pick their favorite flavor framework that they work with and stick with that and stick in that community or know a lot of information about that. But we have samples in our SDK as well as this using frameworks topic that will help introduce you into that if maybe you're on a dev team and a decision is made to use React or use Angular or something, and you don't know anything about it, and you are going to be working with these other devs that do, and you need to get ramped up with it, and you're doing mapping. I mean, that would be a use case for why you're getting involved with this. Renee Rubalcava, who's on our team, he does a lot with the Webpack and the NPM builds and the framework stuff with Angular and React. So if you're already using this stuff and you have very detailed specific questions, he's probably one of the folks that you would want to try and track down this week and talk to at the island. There's also this Nearby Places app that uses React that would be a good place for you to start to see how these things are built. And we have widgets in the SDK. If you just search for framework or any of the specific framework names, you would find those as well.
Okay.
One more thing. So if we go into the guide, these topics are going to be under the developer tooling. This website is going to go out in about 2 weeks whenever we release 4.11, and Julie's going to tell us more about it here in just a little bit. But that's where all this information will live. And you can find the other stuff out under the Esri org on GitHub, and just search for ArcGIS JS and filter by JavaScript. I think that was...
Okay. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a really quick tour of the SDK work that we've done. I think it's worth doing because everything is, well, new. A lot of this has been redone. Our goal for all of the work, I'd say, if I was to sum it up, is to do a better job kind of showing you what you can do. So really kind of get inspired of the different things you could do with the API. But also provide a good onboarding experience. So if you're brand new with the API, being able to go in there, say you had 2 weeks to come up to speed, it has like a guided approach for really learning the core concepts about the API. One of our new rules is we don't want to show you any pictures without showing you how to do it. So if you go down, by the way, you have all your usual links to be able to dive right in if you are an experienced developer and you don't want to look at some of the fluff stuff that we've put together, you can still go right in. But if you scroll down the home page, we have different things that you can do. So whether it's 3D visualization, 2D, and we have samples of what you can do, you can actually go right in and either see a sample, a tutorial, maybe it's a demo application, but basically you should be able to do anything that we're kind of promoting to showing you how to do it. So if you're a new developer, the best place to go is do the getting started. We've got, one of our links is not working. So let me try. Go into.
Do you want to? You can drive off mine if you want.
Okay. Hopefully it works better in your. Do you have a local build?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So let's try that again. Going back to getting started. So the first thing we have, say you're a brand new developer, you can go right into Quick Start. So these are the very basic things you need to do to get started. We also have tutorials. I think we have Al in the room who worked on most of these. They used to be called Dev Labs, and they were sitting in another place within the developer site. Now they're all integrated into the API or the JavaScript SDK. You can easily go between them or go look up topics within the SDK. So it's going to be a really nice experience. Something that I know that him and others on the team have worked on is helping you navigate between them. So I'm actually still in the Quick Start. Let me show you a tutorial. So going into the tutorial, you see what you're going to learn, you see what you're actually going to build. It has a very quick step-by-step instructions that should be 10 minutes or less to do that particular task. And then as I was talking about with navigation, you can see what's next and then related. So one thing I like about the related section is in the past, if you just look at JavaScript API samples, sometimes it won't be clear like, okay, it's nice to learn how to do it in JavaScript, but I need to learn about identity. And that's not within the SDK. Or I need to learn about what is the web map and how do I work with it. So these related labs aren't necessarily specific to JavaScript. They're kind of, some of them are and some of them aren't. You can actually go out and learn the different aspects that tie into your app that may not be just about JavaScript. So some of the other things that we've done in addition to tutorials is reorganize the guide. We've gotten a lot of feedback that people really like the resources we provide, but we haven't provided a really great way to go through it, to navigate it. And you want to learn from start to finish. What are the core principles you need to know to build an app? What is the foundations of the API? So we've put together core concepts, visualization topics. Lloyd showed developer tooling. There's going to be more in the future, but basically, bringing up. Let me click on one of these. Bringing up those core concepts, and then as you get through it, at the bottom, it'll take you to the next thing that logically makes sense after you've learned that particular topic. So this should really help if you hire someone new on your team and they need to come up to speed to kind of get like a guided approach to coming up to speed on the API. Another section that we've done is the showcase. Right now we just have 3 little lonely apps in there, but there's going to be quite a bit more. This is the last thing that we were working on. These are actually pretty cool because sometimes we show you apps we're really excited about, and then after an event they just kind of die out on the branch because people don't know about them. This is a way for us to highlight some really cool apps that are built, inspire you of what can be done. You can actually play around with it or go get the code and make it your own. And then to kind of learn about what that app is doing, we have 4 points of how it's taking advantage of the API. In this case, this app is loading a CSV layer on the fly. It's projecting all of the points on the fly. It's doing a client-side analysis, spatial analysis, and then statistics. So kind of pulling out what those things are and then linking you into the SDK to figure out how to do those different pieces. So we're really hoping, I'm pretty excited about all these changes, and we're really hoping that it's going to just really be another great tool for your development and just help you have a smooth development experience. I wanted to show one more thing on my machine. Just back to the slides. I've really encouraged all the presenters to promote other sessions that are related to the session you're actually attending. But in the case of what's new, it's kind of everything, right? So the best I can do is point you to the blog that we wrote before the conference. It's kind of laying out some of the main big topic areas at the conference. If you want to go to it, I just made you a short URL and check out from kind of a bird's eye view of what are the different web development sessions we're doing and how we kind of have organized them. Really done our best to schedule them so that someone that's interested in building their UI won't have to decide between that and a different UI session, or they should be building on each other. So anyway, check it out and provide feedback if this is helpful or not.
I got one more thing.
Oh, yeah.
So how many of you use the sandbox in the SDK? All right, so you are going to be interested in what I'm about to say then.
I am too, Lloyd. I'm sorry, I skipped you.
That's okay. So I have done some work to change the styling of the way that the code looks. So if you are used to using GitHub, this is kind of themed in that way as far as the colors. Cuts down on the eye strain as far as when you see a certain color and you know that that's a comment or that's a keyword or that kind of thing. So we've adopted that. And one of the other things that we've added in here is in the require block here now, if you mouse over that, you get a little tooltip that it says you can command click to see that in the API reference. So now if you're looking at something, you can quickly get to the doc without having to open up a new tab and search on it. So that's kind of a cool little thing. One of the other things that we added is that anything that is a URL will show up, and you can command click or control click if you're on Windows to see those as well. So hopefully, especially for new people to the API that aren't really familiar with Esri technology, they will see that and be like, oh hey, let me check that out. Especially in the case of things like layer URLs or web map IDs. So people are like, man, what is that? What is that thing? And so now you can just click on that, and it'll take you to that resource and load that, and it'll easily let you find that information. You'll see this pop-up that came up here. One of the other things that I recently added was anytime you click in the code side and you make a change, those changes are going to be saved into the local storage of your browser for that specific sample. I know a lot of people on our team use this to test stuff out, and inevitably they forget and hit Control F5 or whatever it is and refresh the whole browser, and they lose everything that they just typed in there. So if you've been mad about that, hopefully this will make you a little bit happier on your day-to-day basis working. And if you just click the revert to original, it just deletes that item out of the local storage. And in case you didn't know, there are a bunch of keyboard shortcuts in the sandbox. So if you want to increase or decrease the code, or if you're a command line junkie and you want to use Vim, you can use Vim inside the sandbox editor, and you can actually toggle the output and the code too as well. So there's just a bunch of little stuff in there. So as I mentioned before, I spend most of my time working on the site, and we do read your feedback. And if you click feedback on this topic on any of the pages, that email gets sent to all the product engineers on the team, and we do read those and respond and update the documentation based upon feedback that we get from you. So please continue to do that, and I think that's it.
I think that is it. So we really appreciate your feedback. We always like your ideas for future sessions or how we should do a better job. I always read it, every single thing that's sent. We also like your good feedback too, so not just for this session, but for other sessions. Definitely let us know if we did something right too, because I always like the presenters to know that. So please do fill out the surveys. And with that, we're going to open up for questions. I just have 5 minutes because I have to run to Speed Geeking. You guys can meet me there. Not everybody. I don't think it's that big of a room. But anyone have any questions? Here?
So the question is, the filter widget that we demoed, is that built by us or is that built by somebody else? Oh, is it published with the API? The
filter with the legend? That's actually being published part of a template. So you do have the code, but it's not an API widget. It's possible that it could make it back into the API as a widget. More questions? Over here?
When you build a custom widget in this scenario for your own app, could you also take that widget and plop it into a web app builder application?
You know what? I think right halfway into the sentence I knew exactly what you were going to ask. So to repeat his question, he said, if I build a custom widget with the API, can I just plop that into web app builder and will it work? Right? Okay. So no. But actually there isn't a whole lot of work you have to do. Most of Web App Builder is built on top of API widgets. You'll see as we release something part of the API, that very same release after that, Web App Builder will have that widget in Web App Builder. There is some glue you need to put around it to make it work. For example, like basically tying it into the rest of the Web App Builder framework, you need to put that glue in there. But there's also the configuration aspect. So if you want your users to be able to configure something about your widget, you have to define what's going to be configurable. So there's just a little bit of work that you have to do on top of that. Does that answer your question? You can't just do it. You can't just throw it in. You have to do a little work. How to create your own widget for Web App Builder? Actually, that's a really good question. So basically, take a widget you built with the API architecture and then make that a Web App Builder widget. I don't know if they've made a topic on that. If you go to the Web App Builder island, look, they can definitely answer that for you. I just don't know. Sorry. Another question? Over here? Oh, over here? No. So the editor widget, that's a really good question. So the question was, essentially, are we at parity with the editor widget in 4x as we were with 3x? I'd say for a very large percentage of cases, it's going to meet your needs. What's missing in editing in general in 4x is you can't edit related records yet. We don't have snapping, and we don't have a widget for attachment editing. You can edit attachments under the hood, or implement your own workflow, but we don't have it part of a widget. And you can query related records, but you can't edit them yet. And there's some other little things. I mean, we're definitely not done with editing, and we're going to pass pretty far beyond what you can do in 3x, so it's going to be kind of an incremental thing that we're adding more and more, kind of, improving the experience, improving, capabilities. One thing I forgot to mention is we're going to enable you as developers to create your own workflows within the editor widget. So you don't have to build your whole new editor widget. You can just create your own little workflow. So if you saw the widget showed a update workflow and a create workflow, you could theoretically create your own, your own custom workflow and integrate that into the editor widget as well. So there's a lot of things that the team's going to be working on to make a great experience, but we're going to go beyond 3x, but we're not quite 100% parity yet. Actually, could I take a really quick poll on editing? Okay, so you guys have 3 options. We're trying to figure out like the order to do stuff. So we have snapping, related records, and the attachment editor widget. So if you guys had to vote for one of those, who would vote for snapping? Okay, who would vote for editing related records? Is that a little more?
I don't know, that's pretty close.
And then who wants to edit attachments in a widget? Okay, that's definitely not the winner.
That one's out.
Yeah, okay, we're never gonna do that. Just kidding. Okay, so one of the first 2.
You could have like an arm wrestling contest for, or something to see who the winner is.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, sorry, open it back into questions. I think the answer is yes, but I don't want to tell you yes for sure because I could be wrong. There is a session dedicated to vector tiles. Craig Williams is the guy that can answer anything on what's there now and what the roadmap is. He's on the pro team. So definitely.
The question was related to merging more than one source into a single vector tile layer for the people watching the recording.
Thank you, Lloyd. I could take one more question, but Lloyd will probably be here all day. Just kidding, you won't.
I'll be at the showcase the rest of the afternoon. Thank you. We appreciate you attending our session.
Yeah, thank you very much.